A struggling librarian helped a stranger in silence. She never expected to walk down the aisle with him. The library was quiet, the kind of sacred quiet that only old buildings seem to know how to keep. Dust motes floated in the golden light pouring through stained glass windows. It was late afternoon, and most of the visitors had long gone home, leaving only the echoes of turned pages and the faint hum of the air vents. Lena sat behind the circulation desk, sorting through a small pile of returned books. She was used to the silence, even comforted by it. Her world was one of paper and ink, of whispered conversations and the soft creak of shelves that had held stories for generations. That was when she heard the voice, low, frustrated, and clearly trying not to disturb the calm. "No, I said paragraph 6, not section 6. Please listen." The man stood by the research terminal, a phone pressed tightly to his ear, brows knit, his tones strained. "No, I don't speak Ukrainian. I can't. Just please email instead. This isn't working." Lena looked up, curious. The man was well-dressed but disheveled in that academic way. Tweed coat, leather messenger bag, expensive shoes slightly scuffed. His voice lowered to a near growl. "I'm not yelling, Never mind, I'll call back." He sighed and pulled the phone from his ear, staring at it like it had betrayed him. "Excuse me," Lena said softly, stepping around the desk. "I speak Ukrainian. If you want, I can help." He blinked at her, startled. "You do?" She nodded, a gentle smile forming. "I studied in Lviv for 2 years. I can try." He hesitated, then handed her the phone. "Be my guest." She took it, her tone shifting into a confident, melodic Ukrainian. Her posture changed too, calm, precise, focused. Within minutes, she was asking clarifying questions, jotting down notes on the back of a checkout slip, and offering reassurances. The tension in the air softened. When she handed the phone back, she slid the slip across the desk. "If you send the updated ISBN references before 6 p.m. Kyiv time, they'll include your edits in the academic catalog. Otherwise, the listing closes until next year." The man stared at her like she'd just performed alchemy. "You just saved 3 months of work." Lena smiled modestly. "Happy to help." As she turned to walk back to her desk, he called out, "Wait!" She paused. He reached into his coat pocket, retrieved a thin silver business card, and offered it to her. "Ethan Caldwell. Caldwell Academic Publishing." She glanced at the card, surprised. "Lena Hartley. I just work here." He gave a quiet smile, eyes thoughtful. "If you ever want a job where you don't have to whisper your brilliance, call me." She watched him leave the library, the slip of paper still resting between them like an unopened door. Then she tucked the card into her worn notebook and returned to her place among the books. But something inside her had already begun to shift. Lena didn't expect anything to come of it. She assumed the business card would live forever between the pages of her old notebook, tucked next to faded quotes and pressed leaves from summers past. After all, people said things in moments of surprise that they didn't always mean. "This guy's a vlu, but hell toucher really masche." So she went on with her routine. Mornings were for sorting donations, quiet interludes with the children's reading hour, and the occasional lost tourist who mistook the library for a museum. Evenings were for the third shift at the cafe near the metro, where she wore a different name tag and answered to, "Hey miss," more often than her own name. Her sister, Elise, still asked each night if they could afford heat this month. Lena always smiled and said yes, even when the truth was more complicated. Then, 3 days later, the email arrived. From office@caldwellpublishing.com. Subject: Invitation, Project Summit. Dear Miss Lena Hartley, Mr. Ethan Caldwell has requested your presence at an internal project summit scheduled this Thursday at 2 p.m. The meeting will take place at the Caldwell House, 217 Wexford Lane, Brookline. Transportation will be provided. Dress code is casual professional. We look forward to your attendance. Well, Lena read it twice. Then a third time. Paul, Caldwell House. That wasn't just an office building. It was a converted estate where the publishing firm hosted retreats and strategy sessions for senior staff and collaborators. She'd read about it once in a trade magazine she'd skimmed during a slow cafe night. She stared at the screen for a long moment, then glanced at her reflection in the dusty library window, hair tied back in a loose braid, cardigan buttoned all the way up, faint ink stains on her fingertips. It couldn't be real. Or if it wasn't meant for her. Still, on Thursday at 1:20 p.m., a sleek black town car pulled up outside the library's front gate. The driver stepped out and asked for Miss Hartley. Her coworkers stared from the main desk as she hesitantly stepped into the car. The ride through the tree-lined streets of Brookline felt unreal. Each turn brought her closer to a place that existed in magazines and LinkedIn profiles, not in the daily world of overdue books and discount espresso. When they arrived, she saw it, the Caldwell House. Elegant without being ostentatious, ivy clung to the stone walls, and large windows framed sunlit rooms inside. It felt old and grand, but somehow alive. Sewell, a woman in a gray blazer, greeted her at the door. "Miss Hartley? Right this way." Inside, everything was warm wood, leather-bound archives, and the faint scent of rosemary. She was led into a modest room lined with shelves of translated literature, and there, leaning against a long walnut table, was Ethan Caldwell himself, this time without the tweed. A navy sweater, sleeves pushed to his forearms, and reading glasses resting low on his nose. He looked up. "You came." She cleared her throat, unsure whether to sit or stand. "Your email said it was a project summit." He smiled. "It is, and you're the summit." She blinked. I don't understand." He gestured to the folders laid across the table. "We're expanding. A new global initiative for educational translation across lesser-funded universities in Eastern Europe. I need someone who knows language, who knows nuance, but most of all, someone who knows people." "I'm not a linguist," she said quietly. "I'm not even a graduate. I'm just a librarian," he finished for her. "Yes, a librarian who saved a contract by translating a call no one else could, who listened, acted, and never asked for anything in return." She didn't speak. He slid a folder toward her. Inside was a draft contract. Role: cross-cultural communications advisor. Duration: 6 months. Compensation: more than she'd ever earned in a year. She looked up, overwhelmed. "Why me?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "Because you didn't hesitate." The room was silent for a breath. Then Lena reached for the pen. The next morning came too fast. Lena had barely slept. The contract still sat on her kitchen table, signed, beside a half-finished cup of peppermint tea that had long since gone cold. Elise had stared at the paper for a full minute before whispering, "Does this mean we're okay now?" And Lena, with a lump in her throat, had nodded. Not because everything was solved, but because something had shifted. A beginning had finally replaced the endless in-betweens. By 8 a.m., a sleek silver sedan arrived to take her to Logan Airport. Lena had only flown once in her life, coach, middle seat, crying toddler behind her. But this wasn't a commercial flight. When the car stopped at a private terminal, her stomach twisted. A flight attendant in navy stepped forward. "Miss Hartley? Mr. Caldwell is waiting on board." She followed slowly, clutching her canvas tote like a lifeline. The private jet gleamed in the morning sun. At the foot of the stairs she froze. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe he meant to send this opportunity to someone else, someone with a degree and a portfolio and a wardrobe that didn't come from thrift stores. But then she heard a familiar voice from the doorway above. "You made it." Ethan stood at the top of the steps, holding 2 travel mugs. "I brought tea this time." Lena exhaled and climbed. The cabin smelled like cedar and leather. Muted sunlight filtered through tinted windows. She sank into the cream-colored seat across from his, still unsure how she'd gotten here. He handed her the mug. Chamomile somehow. She smiled in surprise. "You remembered." "I pay attention." They took off with barely a lurch. She watched the city disappear beneath her, skyscrapers shrinking into tiny gray teeth on the edge of the water. Her heart raced. Ethan worked quietly for the first part of the flight, fingers tapping at a tablet, reading through briefing notes. Lena stared out the window, sipping slowly. At one point, the plane hit light turbulence, and she instinctively gripped the armrest. Without a word, Ethan stood, retrieved a navy wool blanket from the overhead compartment, and draped it over her legs. "Thanks," she said softly. He nodded. "First time on a jet?" She smiled faintly. Only time. He settled back into his seat. It won't be the last. She looked at him then, really looked. At the quiet lines of his face, the calm in his voice, the way he carried himself like someone who had learned not to raise it. I'm not sure why you picked me, she said after a moment. He set the tablet down. I didn't pick you. I noticed you. That's different. Lena blinked. What's the difference? Picking someone is about choosing a piece that fits a plan. He leaned forward slightly. Noticing someone? That's when the plan changes. She didn't know what to say to that. He smiled gently. We land in 2 hours. Our first meeting's with a panel of educators from Ukraine, Georgia, and Lithuania. It's more of a listening session than a pitch. I can do that, she said. I know. She looked down at her hands, the worn edges of her notebook peeking out from her bag. The same notebook that had seen her through long nights, unpaid bills, and unfinished degrees. Ethan followed her gaze. You don't have to be anyone else, he said. Not in that room. Not with me. And something in her, long silent, long cautious, believed him. The conference center in Warsaw stood like a fortress of glass and light. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the long curve of the Vistula River, where the afternoon sun poured gold onto the water's skin. Inside, there was the hush of importance. Smart shoes on marble floors, name badges, and soft murmurs in at least a dozen languages. Lena walked one step behind Ethan as they moved through the wide corridors. She was dressed in a charcoal gray blouse and the same black slacks she'd worn to her library interviews. Her shoes were polished, her notebook in hand, but inside, her stomach twisted like paper in wind. She didn't belong here. Not really. Every person they passed looked like they were born fluent in authority, lawyers, diplomats, CEOs, and then they entered the room. A wide, oval table took center stage, surrounded by chairs already filling with professors, officials, and foundation leads. Laptops opened. Pens clicked. Glass pitchers of water sweated onto linen coasters. Flags from different countries dotted nameplates across the table. Ethan took his seat and gestured for Lena to sit beside him. She hesitated only a breath, then lowered herself onto the chair. Her fingers found the edge of her notebook like a lifeline. Across from her sat a Ukrainian professor named Dr. Mikhailo Petrenko, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, and precise in posture. He spoke first. Inclusion is a beautiful word, he said in slow English, but in our regions it is often used without weight. There were murmurs of agreement around the table. Lena listened, not just to his words, but to how he said them, the tight control in his vowels, the slight stiffness in his consonants. A man who had been misunderstood too many times. Ephelites. She raised her hand lightly. If I may, she said, then switched to Ukrainian. May I offer a reflection in your native language? The silence was instant. Dr. Petrenko's eyes widened slightly. More surprise than suspicion. He gave a nod. Будь ласка! And then Lena spoke. Not fluently, not flawlessly, but with respect. She told a short story about her time in Lviv, about being lost on a tram route, and how a stranger helped her find her way using only gestures and kindness. She tied it back to language, not just as communication but as a bridge that must be built from both sides. The room stilled. When she finished, the professor nodded slowly, then said something soft to the delegate beside him. That woman smiled. The entire energy in the room shifted, not dramatically, but undeniably. The next speaker addressed her directly in Ukrainian. Lena answered. Then another asked her a question in English, and she translated their reply with subtlety, catching humor where it wasn't obvious, warming the cold phrasing of bureaucratic terms, threading nuance into plain language. Ethan sat beside her, silent but alert. He wasn't leading this room. She was. An hour passed, then 2. At one point, a delegate from Georgia paused and said with a smile, Forgive me, but is she a linguist or a magician? Lena blushed, but translated the compliment word for word. The group laughed, By the time the session ended, there were business cards passed, hands shaken, and even a quiet thank you from Dr. Petrenko himself. "You speak not just our language," he said, "but our silence too." They exited into the evening light, which was now fading into a soft dusk. Ethan didn't speak until they were halfway down the steps. You don't just translate," he said finally. "You listen with your entire being." She looked at him, confused. "That's just what people do." He smiled. "Not everyone, not anymore." They stood at the curb, waiting for the car. The quiet between them wasn't heavy. Lena looked up. "You didn't say a word in that room." "I didn't need to," he said. "You were there." And for the first time since this whole journey had started, Lena didn't wonder if she belonged. She simply stood there, seen, steady, and enough. 2 weeks had passed since the Warsaw Summit, but the echoes of it followed Lena everywhere. Emails now bore her name in the to line instead of CC. Colleagues nodded in the hallway. Some even asked for her opinion. She had a temporary office on the 12th floor of Caldwell Publishing's headquarters, just large enough for a desk, 2 chairs, and a breathtaking view of the Boston skyline. Ethan's name was etched on the executive level above, but he stopped by more often than most would expect from a CEO. He never hovered, never flattered. He'd simply knock once, lean on the doorframe with coffee in hand, and ask, "What are you working on today?" Lena had never felt more terrified or more alive. But change, she soon learned, has shadows. Rachel Knox was the company's senior communications officer. Tall, effortlessly stylish, with a graduate degree from Oxford and a voice made for public radio. She had greeted Lena with polite professionalism on her first day. "Welcome to the deep end," she'd said, with a smile too precise. At first, Lena thought the tension was just unfamiliarity. Then the small things started. Moralai Timian. A file Lena had saved disappeared. An email she'd drafted showed up in a presentation with someone else's name. Meeting times were accidentally updated without her being notified. She tried not to overthink it. She was new. Mistakes happened. Come morning, it didn't feel like a mistake. Come morning. She was preparing an executive summary for a multilingual collaboration with a Ukrainian tech group, something delicate, with implications for both education policy and international funding. She'd been meticulous, but when the final version was submitted, something was wrong. 3 subtle mistranslations had slipped in, minor word changes, but their meaning altered the tone entirely. One phrase, meant to express optional affiliation, now read as contractual obligation. The client responded within the hour, alarmed, offended, and on the verge of walking away. Lena was stunned. She opened her original draft. It was flawless. Then she opened the submitted version. The format was the same. The timestamp showed it had been modified late the night before, under her login. Her breath caught. That wasn't possible. She hadn't even opened the file past 6 p.m. She walked, heart pounding, down the hall to Rachel's office. The door was open. "Did you touch the Ukrainian file?" she asked. Rachel looked up, eyes calm, a spreadsheet open on her screen. "We all have access to the shared drive, Lena. Why?" "There were changes made." Rachel tilted her head, as if confused. "Are you suggesting I altered your work?" Lena didn't answer. Rachel's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'd be careful, dear. In this building, perception moves faster than truth." That afternoon, HR called her in. No accusations, just routine clarification. But the tone was clear. A client had been offended. The translation was hers. An investigation would be launched. In the meantime, she would be placed on temporary leave. Lena walked back to her office in silence. Shua. Inside, she packed slowly. Her notebook. A pen. The folder from Warsaw. She didn't cry. But as she rode the elevator down, her badge beeped red instead of green. By the time she stepped into the late afternoon light, Boston felt unfamiliar, heavy, cold, unforgiving. That night, Elise found her sitting on the couch, staring at a blank page. "What happened?" her sister asked softly. Lena offered a tired smile. "A mistake, but I'll fix it." At midnight, her phone buzzed. From Amanda, assistant to Mr. Caldwell. Subject, meeting request. "Mr. Caldwell requests your presence tomorrow at 9 a.m. in his office. Please come directly." Lena stared at the screen. Meeting her phone bell. It didn't say why, It didn't say if this was goodbye. But she knew one thing. She would go, and she would walk in with her head high, even if her voice shook. Lena stood outside Ethan Caldwell's office at 8:59 a.m., palms cold despite the morning sun warming the marble floors beneath her shoes. The executive floor was unnervingly quiet. She reached for the door handle just as it opened from the inside. Amanda, Ethan's assistant, gave her a gentle nod. "He's waiting for you." Inside, the room was exactly as she remembered it. Sunlight spilling across dark wood, city skyline rising beyond the glass walls, and one cup of hot tea already placed on the corner of his desk. Next to it, a folded sheet of thick white paper. Handwritten. Lena didn't sit. She couldn't. Her voice was low. "I didn't change the file." Ethan didn't respond at first. He stood by the window, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "I know," he said simply. The silence that followed hit harder than any accusation. She blinked. "You know?" He turned slowly, meeting her eyes. "I had IT pull the server logs. The file was accessed from your login after hours, but remotely, from a proxy IP." Lena's heart lurched. "Rachel." "She's already under investigation," he confirmed, "and she's been quietly placed on leave." "Then why?" Her voice caught. "Why the suspension? Why didn't you say anything?" Ethan's gaze softened. "Because I needed to know if you'd come back." Her brows knit. "What?" "I needed to know if you would still walk into this room with your head held high, even after being made to feel small. Not because I doubted you, but because I wanted to be sure you didn't doubt yourself." She sat finally because her knees gave her no choice. Ethan moved to the desk, picked up the paper, and handed it to her. It was a note, written in steady, deliberate ink. "If you were brave enough to walk into the middle of a storm once, then today I believe you are brave enough to stand in the center of yourself." She read it twice, then a third time. "I thought I was being fired," she whispered. Ethan gently took the note from her fingers and set it back down. "This world," he said quietly, "is not always fair, but you will never have to fight it alone." Her eyes burned, not with tears of shame, but of something deeper, a recognition she didn't know she'd been waiting for. "Fair," he added, more softly. "I trust you, Lena. That hasn't changed. And it won't." That evening, the Boston sky wept with light rain. Lena stood by her apartment window, the city blurred behind droplets on the glass. He should have felt relief. But instead, she felt weightless, like a thread had been cut that she didn't realize she'd been clinging to. Then came the knock. She opened the door and saw Ethan. No blazer, no boardroom polish, just a man in a dark coat, collar turned up, hair damp, folder in one hand, and something small tucked beneath his arm. "I thought you might want to see this." He stepped inside quietly, setting the folder on her kitchen table. Inside were digital logs, access history, metadata trails, annotated in his handwriting. "Rachel left a trail," he said. "I followed it." Lena stared at the papers, then at him, mine. "I don't understand why she did it," she whispered. Ethan shrugged lightly. "Fear of becoming invisible. It makes some people cruel." She looked at him for a long moment. "But you believed me." "I didn't need to believe," he replied. "I verified." She almost smiled. "You don't trust words?" "I trust patterns," he said, "and yours never matched guilt." Then he reached into his coat and set something else on the table, a bar of her favorite dark chocolate and a small bottle of lavender hand cream. She blinked, stunned. "Small things," he said gently. "I pay attention." Lena stood still, unsure whether to cry or laugh or just breathe. He turned to leave, hand on the doorknob. "I'm not standing here to be noble," he said without turning around. "I'm standing here because when someone is right, when they've done right, they deserve someone beside them." Then he glanced back just once. "And today, that someone is me." The door clicked shut behind him. Lena didn't move. She stood, staring at the papers, the chocolate, the lavender lotion, each one a quiet punctuation mark in a sentence she was finally beginning to believe. She was not invisible. She never had been. And now, someone else saw it too. It rained all night. Not the loud, angry kind, but the kind of rain that wrapped itself around the city like a long sigh. Gentle, steady, persistent. Lena couldn't sleep. The clock blinked past midnight, then 2 a.m., then 4. She sat by the window, a blanket draped over her legs, watching as the water painted silver streaks down the glass. In the next room, Elise slept peacefully, her soft breathing a kind of tether to the world Lena still hadn't fully rejoined. The proof of her innocence had come. The weight had lifted. But in its place was something else, the quiet exhaustion that comes after survival. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was how quickly she'd been doubted, how swiftly a reputation could tilt with a whisper and a login timestamp. She sipped cold tea and thought of Ethan, of the note he'd written, of the way he'd stood in her doorway, soaked with rain and honesty. She wasn't used to being believed. By 6:30 a.m., the city began to stir beneath the mist. Headlights passed like gliding ghosts. Lena stood and stretched, her body aching with the kind of fatigue that lives in the heart more than in the bones. Then, another knock. Not firm, not hurried, soft, as if unsure whether it deserved to be there at all. Lena opened the door and found Ethan again. No folder this time. Just him. He held a simple black umbrella and a small, paper-wrapped bundle that smelled faintly of baked bread and something herbal. "I didn't know if you'd be awake," he said. "I didn't sleep," she answered. He nodded. "I didn't either." She stepped aside and let him in. The apartment was warm but cluttered, books stacked on every surface, half-sorted paperwork from 2 part-time jobs Lena hadn't officially quit yet, and a watercolor Elise had painted taped to the fridge. Ethan glanced at it. "Your sister?" Lena nodded. "She loves painting. Abstract stuff, mostly. She says it's the only way she can explain things without needing words." He smiled gently. "I understand that more than I'd like to admit." They sat at the tiny kitchen table. Ethan unwrapped the bundle. 2 slices of warm rosemary bread, a small container of lemon tea, and a napkin folded neatly with handwritten notes. Bullet points, reminders, and tucked at the bottom. "Don't forget to believe in her." He slid it across the table without explanation. Lena blinked. "Did you write that to yourself?" "I did," he admitted. "Last night, after I left." She didn't know what to say, so they ate in silence. The kind of silence that doesn't need fixing. When the meal was finished, Ethan spoke again. "You've had every reason to give up. On the job, on me, on the system. But you didn't." Lena looked down. "I wanted to." "But you didn't," he repeated. "That matters more than anything else." The rain outside had softened into a drizzle, like even the storm had tired itself out. Lena leaned back, closed her eyes for a moment, then asked softly, "Why are you here?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "Because I'm tired of walking into rooms and only hearing voices that sound like mine. And because when you speak, people don't just listen, they feel." She opened her eyes and looked at him. Really looked. No title, no suits. Just a man who had seen something in her when the rest of the world saw a footnote. "I don't know what this is," she said. He nodded. "Me neither. But it feels honest." "Yes," Ethan said. "That's the word I keep coming back to." They stood a little later, almost at the same time. A strange rhythm had begun to emerge between them. Unplanned. Unforced. "One lunga says." Ethan says. Me nodded. Ethan says. Ethan says. Ethan says. Ethan says. One lunga says. Ethan says. Ethan says. Ethan says. Turned. "Would it be strange if I asked to walk you to the library?" She smiled. "Only if you expect me to share the umbrella." He chuckled, and for the first time in days, she did too. And so, under the soft rain and between words that didn't need to be spoken, they stepped into the gray morning. Not as boss and employee. Not even quite as friends. But as 2 people who had survived different storms, and now, for the first time, chose to walk through the next one side by side. Nestled between the soft green slopes of Lake Lucerne, the villa didn't look like the kind of place where decisions were made. It looked like the kind of place where stories were remembered. Stone walls, centuries old, stretched beneath vines of wisteria and ivy. Terracotta roof tiles warmed under the Swiss sun, and the windows, tall and half open, carried the sound of birdsong and distant bells into every room. It was here, in this quiet cradle of mountains and water, that Lena found herself 2 weeks after the rain. She hadn't even known such places existed outside novels. The villa was hosting a 3-week working session, a multinational initiative Ethan's company had joined in partnership with the European Translation Council and a United Nations education branch. The goal: to develop open-access academic materials in underrepresented languages. Lena wasn't just attending, she had been invited as co-lead on cultural adaptation strategy. The first day, she nearly dropped her bag when she saw her name listed above scholars from Helsinki, translators from Nairobi, and UNESCO delegates from Manila. Ethan had arrived separately. He was technically here as senior consultant, though everyone knew he was the gravity that held the room together. But in this place, something about him was different. Lighter, he wore linen instead of wool, smiled more often, ate breakfast on the terrace with no phone in sight. Lena felt it too, a loosening, a quieting. Copan Bartens. Here, she wasn't the woman accused or the girl saved. Houth, she was simply herself. They worked in long, sun-drenched rooms filled with whiteboards, annotated maps, tea carts, and laptops powered by a dozen languages. Lena thrived. Not in loud declarations or perfectly polished ideas, but in her steady way, listening, connecting, reframing. Her Ukrainian translations carried warmth. Her edits made pages sing. Her questions reminded the group that clarity wasn't just about grammar, it was about dignity. On the third evening, she wandered into the library. The villa's library was more sanctuary than study. Stone archways, deep chairs, rows of poetry and politics and philosophy. A fire crackled quietly, more for ambiance than warmth. Ethan was already there. He sat by the window, a book in one hand, his glasses slipping slightly down his nose. His jacket had been tossed over a nearby chair, sleeves rolled to the elbow, collar open. He looked up when she entered. Kian. It suits you, he said softly. Kian. She raised an eyebrow. The room? No, he replied, setting the book aside. This. Geneva. The work. The stillness. You. She didn't answer right away, walked instead to the fireplace, letting the amber light play across her hands. It feels like I've finally caught up with myself, she admitted. Like I stopped chasing and started arriving. He nodded slowly. That's rare. Most people never arrive. Lena turned to look at him, truly look. You're different here too, she said. He gave a quiet smile. Maybe I remember who I was before the boardrooms. Silence settled between them, not empty, not expectant, just enough. Later, when she returned to her suite, the lights were dim and the windows cracked open to the scent of pine. On her desk sat a small, elegant box. No note, no explanation. Inside was a fountain pen, midnight blue enamel, silver trim, her initials delicately engraved near the cap in cursive, so fine it looked like a signature in the wind. She stared at it for a long time. Then, another knock. She opened the door. Antu gone. Ethan stood there. Antu. No clipboard, no agenda, just him. You liked it? He asked, nodding toward the pen in her hand. Antu. She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped forward and kissed his cheek. Not for effect, not for romance, for truth. He didn't speak, didn't move, just looked at her, with something close to awe, and she looked back, open, unafraid. Whatever had been uncertain between them wasn't anymore. They didn't fall into each other that night. They didn't name what was growing, but something settled. A rhythm, a knowing, a beginning without pretense. The villa had grown quieter in the second week. Deadlines had softened into dialogue. The whiteboards were now lined with inked-out revisions and cross-cultural notes held by pins and hope. Delegates wandered barefoot into breakfast. Laughter hummed under the olive trees in the courtyard. But most evenings, Lena returned to the library. So did Ethan. They rarely planned it. But somehow, they both knew. There was something sacred in those hours between dusk and moonrise, when language became memory, and silence didn't ask to be filled. One evening, Lena arrived to find Ethan already in his usual chair by the window, firelight painting the soft lines of his face in gold. He looked up and gestured to the seat across from him, as he always did. But tonight, she didn't sit. Instead, she walked toward the shelves and ran her fingers along the worn spines of books that had survived more wars than anyone present. She pulled one down, a collection of Russian poems, then held it in both hands like something holy. "My mother used to read these aloud," Ethan said, voice quiet. Lena turned. He wasn't looking at her, he was looking at the fire. She was from St. Petersburg, had a voice like velvet and a spine like steel. "She taught me to count in Russian before I could spell in English." Lena sat now, slowly. "Do you remember the first poem she taught you?" He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Pushkin," he said. "I loved you. Perhaps love still burns in me. I didn't understand a word of it at the time. I just liked the way she said the word Lubov, as if it was too fragile to touch." Lena listened without interrupting. It wasn't a story told often. She could feel it. "She died when I was 17, Ethan said. "Cancer. Fast and cruel." He looked at her now. No mask, no armor. Just a man remembering the woman who had shaped the best parts of him. "I stopped speaking Russian after that," he added. "Didn't touch it again for years. Not until you." Lena's breath caught. Cancela. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. She reached into her bag and pulled out her notebook, worn, frayed, pages layered with ink from 100 half-slept nights. "I started this the day after my sister's accident," she said. "I was supposed to be in school, studying linguistics. I had a dream of working in policy or cultural diplomacy." She flipped to a page filled with Ukrainian idioms. "But then Elise got hurt, and dreams don't hold up well next to hospital bills." Ethan leaned forward slightly. Not to interrupt, just to listen closer. "Dex. I worked nights, cleaned at the hospital, took shifts at the cafe, volunteered at the library just to stay near books. But every night, no matter how late, I studied. Russian, Ukrainian, Polish. I didn't even know why. I just couldn't bear the thought that I'd spent years learning something only to forget it." She closed the notebook. "I wasn't afraid of failure," she whispered. "I was afraid of disappearing." The fire crackled softly. Ethan didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "You didn't disappear." She looked up. "You anchored," he continued. "You tethered yourself to something no one else could take from you. That's not weakness, that's strength." Lena felt a tightness rise in her chest. Not sadness, not joy. Something quieter, something earned. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She took it and unfolded it slowly. Inside was a poem, handwritten in Russian, a stanza from Pushkin. "I loved you, perhaps that flame still glows. But let it not distress you anymore. I would not have you sad in grief or woes. I loved you silently, so deep, so sore." She read it aloud in Russian, then again, in English, and for a moment, the room felt still enough to hold it all. Loss, love, language, and the long road between silence and speech. Ethan looked at her, his voice barely above breath. "You brought that voice back into my life." Lena smiled faintly. "And you gave mine a place to land." They didn't touch. They didn't need to. Their connection was already layered between ink and breath, memory and meaning. In a room full of old books and older dreams, two people sat across from each other, not wondering what they were, but finally understanding who they had become, together. The chapel was small, tucked behind a grove of cypress trees at the far end of the villa estate. It wasn't even listed on the guest brochure. No marble pillars, no stained glass, just stone walls, wooden benches and sunlight that filtered in through high, narrow windows like grace itself. They hadn't sent invitations. There was no rehearsal, no catering team, no makeup artist, no string quartet tuning under pressure. There was only a date, written in Ethan's handwriting, folded into Lena's notebook a week earlier, April 17th, just us, no speeches. That morning, the mist clung low to the hills. Dew glittered on the ivy. Lavender swayed in quiet rhythm as Lena walked barefoot across the grass, a simple white dress brushing against her ankles. There was no lace, no jewels, just silk, honest and soft. In her hand, she held no bouquet. She held no bouquet, only a single fountain pen, midnight blue enamel, silver trim. The one Ethan had given her in Geneva, the one that wrote her back into herself. Inside the chapel, guests filled only 3 rows, each person chosen not for ceremony, but for meaning. A professor from Warsaw, a translator from Nairobi. Elise seated in the front, her hair pinned in soft curls, cheeks glowing with joy no illness could diminish. Ethan stood at the altar in a suit of dove gray linen. His hands were steady, but when he saw Lena walk through the chapel doors, his breath visibly caught. She walked slowly, each step not towards tradition, but towards truth. When she reached him, she didn't smile for the crowd, she smiled for him. And in that moment, the room disappeared. There was no officiant, only the quiet turning of heads, as Ethan pulled a folded note from his pocket and spoke. Not loudly, not formally, but with the kind of voice that only belongs to someone who finally found their home. "I don't have vows," he said. "I have memories. I remember the moment you answered a phone call in a library and changed everything I thought I knew about trust. You didn't ask what I owned. You didn't flinch at my frustration. You listened. You acted. And in doing so, you rewrote the entire chapter of who I wanted to become." A hush fell. Some eyes were already wet. "Here." He reached for her hand, kissed her knuckles. "Here. You made me realize that the best people don't always walk into boardrooms, to Berjobel. Sometimes they walk into your life quietly. Holding notebooks and speaking languages that remind your soul it still has pages left to write." Then it was Lena's turn. She didn't unfold a paper. She simply looked at him, her voice clear, steady, and soft. First, in Russian. "Я обещаю быть твоим голосом, когда ты молчишь. Мы человек. I promise to be your voice when you are quiet." Then, in English. "Off a pulse. And your silence when you just want to feel. I will be the interpreter of your heart for the rest of our lives." Elise clapped first. Loud, full of laughter and tears. Then others joined, not out of obligation, but out of knowing. Keys, there was no kiss on cue. But as the bells from the main house chimed the hour, Ethan and Lena leaned into each other, foreheads touching first, hands still clasped between them, and finally, a kiss that wasn't for show but for continuation. Outside, the light had turned golden. Petals drifted from the upper balcony, tossed gently by friends from the villa. They danced in the breeze like punctuation at the end of a long, quiet sentence. And beneath that Italian sky, in a chapel no one remembered to list on any map, a story that began with a whispered translation, ended not with vows but with understanding. A life chosen, a voice heard, a future made, not of noise or fanfare, but of language that only 2 people could ever fully speak: each other. If this story moved you, reminded you that healing is real, or renewed your belief in second chances, we invite you to subscribe to Healing Stories. Here, we share real-life journeys of strength, love, and hope. Stories that speak straight to the soul. Thank you for being here. And always remember, no matter how far you fall, there's always a way back to the light. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know.